Hello and welcome everyone to the third meeting of the UNESCO Working Group on Open Science, the Open Science Monitoring Framework. My name's Ezra Clark, the Chief of Section of Science, Technology, Innovation Policy in the Natural Sciences sector in UNESCO. And it's great to have you to join us again. Great to see the continued interest in the group. So as you'll have seen from the agenda, and we'll show it up on the screen now. We'll start with a very brief background, and then we'll swiftly move on to a presentation of the draft survey for member states, report on the implementation and UNESCO recommendation on open science, followed by a discussion on the draft, and then next steps and closing. So we'll look what we'll be up to next. So then, without further ado, just a quick update. As all of you should know by now, this meeting's in the context of the implementation of the UNESCO Recommendation on Open Science. And again, as I'm sure you're aware, we have set up 5 working groups on, as you can see here on the screen, open science capacity building, policies and strategies, financing and incentives, infrastructures, and this one, the Open Science Monitoring Framework. And as I mentioned, this is the third of our meeting for this working group. And to reiterate the objectives of the working group, it's really to assist the Secretariat in developing a monitoring framework for the UNESCO Recommendation on Open Science. Now, if we go back to the key outcomes from the first meeting, our first working group meeting, which was in September 2022, we concluded in general that the open science monitoring is a complex and multi-layered exercise, which I think everyone agreed, and would require a pluralistic monitoring framework. So we're looking at lots of different types of inputs and from lots of different types of stakeholders and so on. And to achieve this, it includes a survey for member states and an output, which we should discuss in more detail today, and an output analysis based on an inclusive global scholarly databases. And again, more discussion of that later. And then later on, which we'll discuss subsequently, surveys to research organisations and surveys directed at specific experts regarding the values and practices of open science. But really today we're focusing on the survey. So can you next screen? So just to recall, just to remind everyone, the first draft of the survey for member states, was shared with this working group in December last year. And then we discussed this first draft in the second meeting, which was in January. And then the second draft of the survey was sent about 10 days ago to you. And the aim today is to agree on a final draft. Essentially, I mean, there could be some minor tweaks in editing and so on for clarity, and then it will need to go through some. So could you please turn your microphones off? Could you turn your microphone off, please, if you're not speaking? Thank you. And then there'll be some internal procedures that the document has to go through, and we'll mention that a little later. So let's actually have a look at and go through the latest version of the survey. And for this, I will please hand over to Farishta Rafian, who will take us through the survey. Ferry.
Thanks, Ezra, for the introduction. Thanks all the members of the group for joining us again, and thanks for all your inputs so far. As Ezra mentioned, we have shared this last version of the survey with you and also 1 hour before the meeting. And I will ask my colleagues to share it in the chat again with you for your ease of reference. Before I go through the questions of the survey, I would like to repeat a few points from our last meetings, especially for those members who have joined us as new members in this meeting. So this survey, as Ezra mentioned, is for the aim of the survey is for monitoring policies and mechanisms for open science, particularly at the national and governmental levels, that are designed for operationalization of open science in line with the UNESCO recommendation on open science. This monitoring exercise by the member states will be done every 4 years. And the first round of that will be from mid-2024 to mid-2025, with the aim to present the results of this reporting to the 43rd General Conference of UNESCO. So the survey's questions are focused only on the provisions of the recommendation, which means the 7 areas of actions and the values and principles that are agreed by the member states. The survey will be addressed to UNESCO member states, meaning to the ministries and governmental authorities and bodies that are in charge of STI and STI policies. After the member states will approve the final version of the survey in the Executive Board of UNESCO in 2024, they will also be asked to designate national focal points, and the national focal points then prepare their responses through a consultative and multi-stakeholder approach with the local actors of open science in their countries, including the scientific community. The survey will be accompanied by regional and national workshops and trainings by the Secretariat to assist the national focal points in their responses. And these workshops will also offer opportunities for exchange of experiences between the countries and exchange of lessons learned. The result of this survey will be also accompanied, as discussed before, by other elements of the OS monitoring framework, such as the output analysis of the inclusive data sources on scholarly data sources, and also and also by the surveys addressed to research organizations and researchers. We are also preparing the first edition of the UNESCO Open Science Outlook that will provide an overview of the open science trends and the baseline for member states for their monitoring. The aim is to have this outlook published by November 2023. So now I will go through different chapters of the survey that are basically the 7 areas of actions of the recommendation. The first one would be on promoting a common understanding of open science, associated benefits and challenges, as well as diverse paths to open science. In this section, we ask about any activities toward the promotion and sharing of the recommendation with relevant ministries, institutions, and affiliated organizations in the country. We also ask if the text of the recommendation is translated in national languages. We ask if there is any awareness raising activity implemented or planned by the end of 2025. And we also ask if the values and principles of open science are included in the publicly funded research system. For most of the questions as relevant, we provide an option for the countries to explain briefly about the difficulties and obstacles that they had for implementing any area of action. And the aim for this question is to identify challenges and address them by the Secretariat's activities in future, for example, by capacity building activities. The second chapter would be on developing and enabling policy environment for open science. This chapter is the longest chapter and has the highest number of questions, basically because we would like to make sure that we will cover different kind of instruments, and we would like different countries with different political structures and different entities in charge of open science and STI would be able to respond to the questions. But we can discuss in this meeting how we can merge or maybe minimize the number of the questions. So we will ask about the national policies on science, technology, and innovation in general, if the country has such policies. Then we ask if open science or any of its key elements are addressed in the national policies or a set of policies or legal frameworks. We also provide examples for national policies and legal frameworks. And when asking about these policy documents, we specifically ask about the authorities in charge of development, entities involved in the development of the document, year of adoption and last update of the document, key areas and sections of the document, and elements of open science that are addressed. We also ask if there is any other policy instrument promoting open science in the country. We ask about the objectives of those instruments and also the allocated budget, among other characteristics of those documents. We ask if the country has any national implementation plan, strategy, or roadmap for implementation of open science. We have this question as a separated one because we can imagine that for many countries, this is the second step of implementing open science policies after they already have a policy in place. We also ask about funding mechanisms and if open science practices are addressed or integrated in the existing research funding mechanisms. We can discuss if we should keep funding mechanisms as a separated option or we can merge it with policy instruments today. We also ask about institutional policy and strategies for open science, especially at the level of research performing institutes, universities, scientific union, and associations and learned societies. In this specific question, we encourage the countries to consider policy and strategies that address all elements of open science, with referring also to citizen science and participatory science or co-production of knowledge with multiple actors beyond the scientific community. We understand that these are different steps of policy development in countries, so we also consider if countries are in the process of development of any of these policy documents. And we also ask if there is any public-private partnership on open science established in the country. And in the last part, we ask if there is a national monitoring framework for open science or any indicator that is integrated in monitoring frameworks for the general STI policies of the countries. The third part would be on investing in open science infrastructures and services. We specifically ask about the percentage of GDP spent on research and development in the country. We ask about the percentage of population having access to reliable internet and bandwidth. We ask about the existence of national research and education networks and if these networks are accessible to all relevant actors of science and open science. We ask if the country is hosting or is funding any federated regional or international IT open science infrastructure, and if there is any north-south, south-south collaboration for development of shared multinational or regional or national open science platform. We specifically here on these infrastructures, we specifically ask about the date of establishment, language, the target groups and beneficiary groups, governance, or if it's community, if there are some community agreements on these infrastructures, the scope, the stage of research, the elements of open science or the disciplines of research that it covers, and accessibility to different users in the region or internationally. We also have a specific question on different types of open science infrastructures that countries might have. We provide examples of infrastructures based on the definitions provided in the recommendation. Initially, in the last version, we had the examples and types of infrastructures in a long list. But to make it more clear for responding, we decided to separate the options only based on the type of the infrastructures and provide the examples just for guiding the responses. So the types that we are asking about are basically the main types that are addressed in the recommendation: federated information technology infrastructures, community managed infrastructures that support bibliodiversity and social engagement with the society, platforms for exchange and co-creation of knowledge, and community-based monitoring and information systems that complement the national monitoring systems. We also ask specifically how is the compliance of the infrastructures with the recommendation. For example, in considering the inclusivity, accessibility, interoperability, community governance, implication of fair and care principles, capacity of data stewardship for different disciplines of science, and if it's a non-commercial infrastructure. We also have a section on capacity building for human resources and education, digital literacy for open science. We ask if there has been any systematic capacity building programs on open science in higher education and research institutes. We ask about capacity buildings targeted at policymakers on integration of open science value and principles in STI policies. We ask if there's a framework on open science competencies incorporated into research skill curricula, and if there is if open educational resources are used for open science capacity building. We also ask if there has been initiatives supporting science communication to other scholars, decision makers, and public. So we have also a question on a chapter on fostering a culture of open science and aligning incentives for open science. We ask about initiatives to align research assessment and evaluation processes with open science at national or institutional level. We ask about specific clauses that recognize open science practices, such as sharing, collaborating, engaging, or dialogue with other knowledge systems. To make it more clear for practices, we have a list of examples that can include all the 4 pillars of open science. Basically, it will include sharing open science knowledge in the shape of publications, research data, educational resources, software, and hardware with other scientists or with the public, sharing or using open science infrastructures, collaboration with other researchers, and with national and local societal actors such as policymakers or sectors such as industry, agriculture, and health, and collaboration and open dialogue with the indigenous people and local communities. We also ask if there has been initiatives to recognize and reward open science, and we specifically ask which stakeholders, for example, if they are funders, publishers, universities who integrate and reward open science. One chapter is also on promoting innovation approaches for open science at different stages of the scientific process. We ask if there are national or institutional initiatives on innovative participatory methodologies or procedural changes at different stages of research cycle to increase the openness of the entire scientific process. And we specifically ask which of the following elements are addressed in these actions. For example, if they address preprints, open peer review practices, sharing of negative scientific results, participatory methods that value inputs from societal actors such as citizen science or crowdsourcing, participatory identifying of the needs of marginalized community, and promoting research that has social relevance, and open innovation practices. The last chapter is on promoting international and multi-stakeholder cooperation in the context of open science and with view to reducing digital, technological, and knowledge gaps. We ask how the country is promoting and facilitating international scientific collaboration on open science, if they have some strategy or plan for stimulating cross-border multi-stakeholder collaboration on open science, such as exchange of best practices, capacity building, and exchange of metrics for open science. And we also ask if the country is involved in establishment and decision about regional and international funding mechanisms for open science. So these are the 7 chapters and the questions of the survey, and I would be happy to discuss additions or how we can refine this further with you today. Thanks for your attention. So with this, I would like to open the floor to you. Please, if you have any point to add, raise your hand and we will give you the floor. Egelvi, you have the floor, please. And if you, yes, if you wish, please turn on your camera so we can also see you. And please, those who take the floor, also introduce yourself and your institutions if you wish. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Actually, I'm Aglia Butkevichina from Lithuania, from Kaunas University of Technology. And also I represent Lithuania in the EOA EGOS network on this open science. I was just wondering several questions regarding this survey. First question is who will be responding, how you will disseminate, because it's very important that all stakeholders in the country would be included and the answers would be deep and enough to really capture these very important aspects, especially that you are going not just on national level, but also institutional level. So how you will organize this process, maybe you already introduced, I missed maybe beginning, but that would be, I think, a very important aspect that the data would be rich and really informative.
Exactly, and, you're absolutely, yes. Yes, please ask your second question.
And the second question is about, are these just kind of open-ended questions? And because if it's, or it will be also some just multiple like as survey questions, multiple choice questions, or how it will be organized, everything. So these are my 2 questions. First of all, to clarify the intentions of the survey and like to have it rich data on that.
Yes, thanks. These are important repeated questions, and so the aim, as I mentioned at the beginning of the slides, the aim is to capture the policies and mechanisms at the national and governmental level with this survey. We also have elements that will go at different levels of the science system, like they will be addressed to the researchers or institutions. Of course, we also have questions regarding, for example, to the institutional policy and practices regarding open science at the institutional level in this survey. We communicate this survey with our member states through the permanent delegations and national commissions. And those are the entities that are in contact with the ministries of science and then ministries with the institutions in charge of research and science and universities. We accompany the respondents to or the focal points of each country by a set of training and workshops And we encourage all those people to prepare the responses through a consultative process in dialogue with different actors of open science in their countries, especially including the scientific community. But to what extent they would include the institutional level practices is the decision of the countries. So as said, with this specific surveys, we are looking at what the country and the government has done for implementation of open science. And how the questions will be, yes, most of the questions have options such as yes, no, if the action is planned or it's in the process of development or it's partly done. So this is the first time that the countries are reporting on open science, and it's a new concept in many countries. That's why we can imagine that most of the responses will be qualitative and not quantitative, especially at the level of the governments. There are practices of open science that we can measure at the scientific level more. That's why we would use those other elements of these frameworks to capture those practices. Yes, so these are the choices, but we also would like the countries to be able to explain in details, and we guide them through the options and additional information that we ask for every question. Yes, thanks. I hope I answered your question.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you.
Hi, Eloy, the floor is yours. Thanks for joining.
Good afternoon. I'm Eloy Rodriguez. I'm from Union University and Open Air, but I also a colleague from EGLE on the UA Open Science Expert Group. I'm at a conference, so if there is some noise, I already apologize. My question is somewhat related with what EGLE mentioned. I understand this survey is targeted to governments, and I think it's right. So I wonder if, for instance, question 2.5, where we are asking about the institutional policies, what type of data we will get, if it will be really reliable, because what we will probably get will depend on the level of knowledge and engagement of the government with what is going on in institutions, and that will be very variable. In some countries we'll get very good data, in other countries we'll probably get very incomplete data. And the similar question or suggestion is also for the sections 5 and 6, where we have questions that you ask if there are initiatives at national or institutional level. I would recommend that at least we, on the formulation, you separate. So ask if there are initiatives at national, and then yes or no, and institutional, and then yes or no, because otherwise, of course, I know that there was space for the countries to explain in more detail, but again, maybe some will probably do it and some will probably not do it. And you might not have a very clear vision, because in some cases they will be replying, yes, there are things at national level. In other cases, yes, there are things at institutional level and not national. So I would probably recommend to try to rephrase the question, or at least split the question, so they can indicate if they are replying about national initiatives or institutional initiatives. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Very good point, and we will definitely consider how we can make this clear. Also, not for the answers not to overlap. It's true that probably many governments will not have all the information that they need at the institutional level at the first place, but we also have the duty to shine light that open science is implemented at the institutional level. So we need to include these questions, and the countries will have almost a year to prepare the responses. So we expect them actually to go and talk to the institutions in charge of science and research performing institutes to get the information. But you are right, probably we can think about separating them to better distinguish between the national and institutional actions. Thanks. Marita, the floor is yours. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you. My videos doesn't work. Sorry about that. I work in the Learned Societies, the Federation of Learned Societies in Finland, and we carry out the national open science monitoring in our country. And we ask the institutions to provide links to their guiding documents in 4 different areas of open science and then in general. And we had almost 100% response rate. That means we got replies from 47 institutions. And then because it's 5 different areas, it will amount to a huge number of links that we would have to report nationally. And I don't think that would make a lot of sense. I mean, we can, of course, provide a list to the links in each area, but then you are also asking about details of the contents, and that is just not really doable in our context.
Okay, this is really good to hear that the institutions are so active in your country, and you have already started the monitoring of open science. I agree, and that's why we leave it to the national focal points to decide to what extent they would like to include these institutional practices, and probably you can find ways to group them in a way, or see if there is like a systematic effort done by the institutions, or if there is any coordinations between them, or maybe like picking the few areas that most of the institutes are active on. So this would be like the art of the national focal points in this reporting. But I think it's great to have this information collected in one place, especially because during the training and the workshops, the national focal points will have the chance also to exchange on these experiences. We can maybe at the later stages, we can maybe have a closer look at what you have collected and see how it can fit to this level of reporting. But also maybe you would also like to explain a bit now about the monitoring framework that you have prepared. Is it more quantitative, qualitative, what you have been working on? Is it specifically on the provisions of the recommendation? It's similar to the survey that we have now. It's very interesting.
Yes, very many of the questions, they are of course not the same, but they take into account the most important international frameworks, which is the UNESCO, and then of course, as we are in Europe, the EOSC monitoring questions. And all information is openly available and in English. So for the institutions, it is. I can put the link to the chat,
that would be great.
Can,
also,
yes,
also from other participants, if you already have some monitoring frameworks or platforms in your countries, it would be great for us also to be aware of them at this stage. And I also want to invite my other colleagues from UNESCO, if they have any point about any of these questions and comments by the members, please feel free to take the floor from me. So Lauren, please, the floor is yours. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you. I'm Lauren Cadwallader. I work for the Public Library of Science and Open Science Publisher. I've been looking at the survey and kind of listening to the conversations, and it seems very much like this is focused on kind of open science as applicable to kind of academic research and research done, or science done at universities, institutions. But of course, there's a kind of open science movement more broadly, you know, things like open governmental data and open source software and industry. So I was wondering, is the survey trying to capture those kind of activities around open science? And if so, is it kind of worth specifying which areas of, I guess, sciences that this applies to, whether it's more research focused or whether it includes kind of industry and kind of areas outside of the kind of academic science that's going on?
Thanks. So the scope of the UNESCO recommendation on open science is actually only on publicly funded research. So in this recommendation, governmental data and other open practices beyond the publicly funded research are not addressed. And to report on the implementation of this recommendation, the member states are not required to report on those exercises. But for example, UNESCO has other policy instruments. We have open access in or open data and open softwares in a broader scope taken care of by the sector for communication and information, but the scope of this specific recommendation is publicly funded research. Somebody asked in the chat, how do they know if their country is surveyed? All member states of UNESCO, the 194 now member states of UNESCO, will be they will be invited to participate in this reporting, but because they are required to report on that. So yes, every country will participate. Do we have more points? Do we have specific points about the questions? I can also share the survey on the screen or the slides again if needed. And maybe my colleagues can help me to pick questions from the chat. Yes, Ismail. Hi, the floor is yours.
Hi, thanks for the update. It looks nice, very nice. Thank you.
Thank you.
One issue that keeps worrying me is that since we have seen that some of the open science practices are quite resource intensive, meaning they require money, rather than leading to more equality in science, they are leading to more inequality, right? So the case of open access and APCs is the most prominent case. One of the things that I found was really fantastic about the UNESCO recommendation is that it had values and principles. Now, looking at the questions, it seems that the focus is on sort of promoting if there is advances in open science, in the different open sciences practices. But I wonder whether there would be more scope for putting some, I don't know whether, sub-questions about how does this help to the collective benefit? How does it help to equity and fairness in terms of participation in science? How does it help to the integrity? So not just whether there are initiatives, but also whether these initiatives are linked to UNESCO core values and guiding principles. And I don't know how you would do that, but it seems that there could be still some space. I know a survey is always a matter of making it short, but
Yes.
maybe balance might be found.
Yeah, definitely we can try to do this. One reason that we didn't specifically refer to each value and principle of open science, and each of them then has a list under it, of course, is not, we cannot really like give more weight to one of them. That's why we are listing all of them in the survey, and we are linking to the specific pages of the recommendation that has more explanation about each of these value and principles. I agree with you, and this also came in our previous discussions, that the impact of each of these actions on promoting these values and principles in the science system is very important, but for the main reason of limitation on the number of questions and also not to exhausting the people who respond, we thought that for the first round of the survey, we can focus on the actions that are being done and the impact, because also the monitoring the impact would be a process itself. And we don't want, maybe it won't be very scientific for the people to speculate what would be the impact of this on integrating that value or this principle. So I think we need to work on monitoring the impact for the later stages of this monitoring. But if you have any specific suggestion for this stage, please let us know. Especially written form of questions would help, but especially we do not want to point at specific value and principles, because all this value and principles has been discussed and each of them are important for different countries and different stakeholders.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Do we have more questions? In the chat. Yes, so we have a question in the chat about how the results will be shared. The results will be put all together in a report. I can imagine both nationally, then we can group some of them in the regional and then global conclusions. And a comprehensive report will be then shared with the member states in the 43rd General Conference of UNESCO. But the practice is also to publish the reports of each country online to allow exchange of experiences between the countries. I'm just going through the chat to see if we have more questions. Do we have more points about any of the questions? If you feel like anything is not clear, if you think, especially for the part of policies, we can merge some of the options together, especially the implementation plan, strategies and roadmaps, and the funding mechanisms. If you prefer, if there are discussions on merging them with the policy instruments, please let us know. If there are some, if you think the list of infrastructures is still not clear, because this was one of the issues on the last version, please let us know. Okay, can I take this that everyone is happy with this survey? Okay, great. I would like to ask Anna and Tiffany and Ezra if they have any point to add about the discussions that we had so far.
No, I think it's very, very useful feedback, and thanks to everybody for joining and having a look. The questions about impacts are super important, and I think we have to kind of think in a sequence. Start with certain things and then move on to others, try to understand then and analyze some of these policy documents. I think somebody also said that in the chat, the idea is not just for them to send us the links, but also to send us the actual documents so that we can then do some analysis later on and understand, what we can learn from these different documents. But definitely impact is what we are all looking for. And we'll have to see what is the best moment and way to tackle that for the recommendation and others. And then, yes, there were some questions about the timeline, and I think Ezra will talk about it in the next session, unless there are some additional questions about the actual survey. Maybe we can move on to the next presentation.
There is maybe one more question that we can address here. Andrea in the chat is asking maybe, or he's suggesting maybe acquiring relevant policy documents where they exist could provide additional information. Yes, definitely this is something that we will ask member states. For many of these actions, we ask for additional information, links, and especially for the policy documents, we ask for a machine readable version of PDF so we can do further analysis hopefully on them. Yes, the timeline. I think we don't have any question that is not answered in the chat, and no hand is up. So with this, we thought that this can be a short meeting, but we wanted to make sure that we allocate enough time for discussion of the survey this time. Okay, so with this, I think I can pass the floor to Ezra to discuss the next steps. Thank you all so much for your inputs.
Indeed, thank you. Thank you, Ferry, and thank you everyone for the inputs. I think we are encouraged by certainly those inputs, and then that there's not a huge amount of significant and serious comments at this stage. So I think we take that as a sign that we're on the right track, and people generally are in agreement with how it's done. So let's have a look at the timetable. Let's have a look at the next steps, please. So if you go to the next slide, there should be a timetable there. Okay. So, okay, the first thing, July 2023, that's now. So the final feedback on the working group essentially is done. As I mentioned, there will, of course, be adjustments and edits and so on. And yeah, just responding a little bit to the point of course, these things always are a balance in how much information you want and how much you can expect people to fill in. So it's quite a skill and quite a challenge. But as was said, you know, because there's a lot of time and trainings and so on to go along with it, I think we can assume that what we're asking is okay. Anyway, so after this, then we'll make the final changes and a few edits and so on, and then there's a fairly lengthy internal validation process that will take us to essentially the end of the year, and in the first quarter of next year, this will go. EXB is the executive board. For those not so maybe intimately familiar, this is the one of the bodies under the General Conference that examines the work programme and the budgets and submits that for consideration, well, depending on the thing, to the General Conference. So it's a subsidiary body of the General Conference that has 58 member states in it. So anyway, it needs to be discussed and adopted by the Executive Board, and then we have almost a year, 24 to 25, where we will work with the member states to assist them in responding to the survey. And this, hopefully, as I kind of mentioned, will get over this challenge of you know, being quite daunting or comprehensive in what we're asking. So because of the time and the fact that we'll provide support and guidance and help, hopefully that will do so. And then we're looking, quite far ahead now. So to the Executive Board in the third quarter of 2025, there'll be a synthesis report, a summary report of all the responses received. And then in November of that year, November 2025, that will go to the 43rd General Conference. And the comments from the Executive Board, I say, will be transmitted to the General Conference for their consideration. So you can see it's a fairly long process until we end up with our final report and kind of endorsement by the General Conference. So but a lot to be done, and you know, this was the right time to do it because of the long time that these things take. So I think if we jump to the next slide, please. So the next step, so really that in terms of the working group engagement in that process, it's essentially done for the moment. And then the next will be the Open Science Outlook. We haven't, if I recall, we haven't really discussed the Outlook so much in this meeting. This is a document that's intended to provide like an overview, a snapshot of open science status and trends around the world at both global and regional levels. But this will be shared in September, so shortly, couple of months, this will be shared with you, but also with all the other working groups, and we'll collect comments on that by October. So end of September, early October, we'll collect comments on that for the Outlook, with an aim that it will be published and launched by the General Conference at the end of this year. So in that's the plan for that. So in terms of this working group, we have a little holiday, we can say. So the plan will be to meet again in early 2024. For us, the latter part of the year is pretty much taken up with the executive board and the general conference. And so we will then come back in early 2024 for this specific working group to look at the global scientific scholarly databases, which I did mention in the very beginning of one of the 4 elements under consideration in this working group. So I hope that's clear. If we jump ahead, I think we're going to go to our, I think, usual advertisement of the Outlook. Indeed we are. So just of the toolkit rather. So just to remind everyone, this is the Open Science Toolkit. All the elements here have been developed with you, with the other working groups, with our steering committee, and inputs from various experts and stakeholders to produce these. This was soft launched last year. It's all available. You can see the link there. So please make sure to, thank you, Tiffany. She's put the link in the chat as well for easy access. So you have various documents here, guides, checklists, fact sheets, indexes, and so on, which are already available. And the next slide will just show you, if we look what's in the pipeline. So coming up, we have, in terms of guides, engaging society in open science, supporting open science hardware, open source hardware rather, for open science. We have a checklist on institutional open science, a checklist for an institutional open science action plan, fact sheet on intellectual property rights, which we're developing with WIPO, an open science Q&A, and the Outlook, which we just mentioned. So those are all, I think, in the oven was an expression someone used a few minutes ago. So they're all in the pipeline. They'll be used. They'll be released fairly shortly. Okay, next slide. Okay, and with that, please see the website, the Open Science website here, if you wish to contact us on anything. For please feel free to use the email here. And really just leaves me to say thank you once again very much to everyone. Your inputs from today, but also the written inputs and the inputs in the previous 2 meetings are hugely appreciated and have helped us a lot in how the survey's been crafted and guided and prepared. So we very much appreciate that. Thanks to everyone. Thanks for your continued interest and participation, and particularly the time you spent to join these meetings and to provide inputs. So I don't think there's anything more to add than to again say thank you very much. If any colleagues want to say again, but we'll have a bit of a pause now for this working group, and we'll come back early next year. So from my side, thank you very much, and we'll see you all relatively soon.